Today's podcast sponsor is Huber Engineered Woods, and I want to talk to you about zip sheathing and why we use zip sheathing. I know you've heard me talk about it on the podcast before, but I thought let's just lay it out in the simplest of forms. Number one, when I install it properly, I tape the seams, I liquid flash the seams, I manage for water with my windows. I use their products. I don't have to worry about water. There are times when we install drywall inside of a house and we don't have cladding on the outside because I know Zip System is going to be waterproof. So that's number one. Number two, I can manage for air. So using Zip System sheathing on the walls, my last 5 houses we built were all below passive house levels of air leakage. They were all below that 0.6 ACH50. And we're not putting that much effort into air sealing. We're just making sure that we tape well, which we manage for water, we manage for air. And the last 5 houses that I built all had Zip R, because that continuous insulation that comes adhered to the back of my zip sheathing that I'm already putting up and installing, now I have continuous R value that I get the whole R6 or the R9 or R12, whatever it is. I don't see building any other way. It works for us. It can work for you. Make sure you go to huberwood.com and check them out. And Huber, thanks for sponsoring the podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Unbuild It podcast. It is a great day. We are a Yoast-free podcast today. Peter's not with us. And
Peter Yoast does not exist.
Peter Yoast does not exist. Peter Yoast is a myth. Speaking of myths, Jake on the last podcast talked about how it's going to be months before we have Dan back. And I got to tell you, that months went down to literally minutes because Dan is back and we are going to do solar panels 102, where we're going to the next level, just a short step up. But there's an awful lot to learn about solar panels. We're very fortunate to have Dan with us. And unfortunately, Jake is in charge of hosting this one. So reluctantly, I'm flipping it to Jake.
So number one, if you didn't listen to the first conversation with Dan, now's the time to stop and go back and listen to the first conversation with Dan. In fact, now's the time to go back to the beginning and re-listen to every podcast that we published so that you're truly up to speed with what we're going to talk about today, correct?
Yes, yeah. Because you make all
Stop wasting your time. You're going to have to go back and listen to them.
About me that people really need to go back and listen to get the truth. But go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's okay. I think you did. So Dan Shifley from Dogwood Solar. Dogwood is our solar company in Columbia, Missouri.
How did you come up with Dogwood?
You know, do you have a couple minutes?
I do.
Okay.
We do.
So it initially started out as something else. And then
That's an odd name for a company.
Well, it's interesting, though. We have a lot of listeners that are contractors that are starting a company, and they're like, what do I call it?
Yeah, and so I'll be totally frank. It started out as Missouri Sun Power. And
Missouri or Missouri?
No, I go Missouri.
Thank you.
Missouri is
Dan's what we call a reader in Missouri.
I'm not a politician, so I can say Missouri. All politicians say Missouri.
Gotcha.
And so it started out as that, and then I got a cease and desist letter from Sun Power Corporation that had that Sun Power Run Together trademarked. And so I said, oh no, well, what do I do now? And so I spent a few months or a few weeks to a few months, I can't remember now, but struggling, and I'd think of something and the domain wasn't available, or I'd think of something else and that doesn't really sound great. And one morning it just kind of hit me. I was walking the dog and it's like Dogwood. And so I went and checked, and before I got too excited, I made sure that the name was available because Dogwood is the state tree of Missouri. Okay. And so it kind of comes together with, roots in Missouri, and it's not Missouri, blah, 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 something solar like so many are, and it's just a little more unique spin. I feel like it's kind of homegrown roots here.
Gotcha. Are you native? Missouri?
I'm not. I'm actually originally from St. Paul, but I moved down here when I was a kid at 10 years
Good
old.
Move.
Yeah.
Right. Good move.
And so I've been here long enough to call it home, but not originally. Yeah.
I had a conversation with a random person a couple weeks ago, and I don't even know how we got on the topic. And they are what a lot of people would describe politically correctly as they are Native American or they are indigenous descent. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't want you to use the Native American thing. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, you were born here, right? I was like, yeah. He said, you're a native. You can say American Indian. Most people are fine with American Indian.
Yeah.
And totally aside, but I was just like, oh, I'd never thought about it like that before. I was born here. I am a native.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed somebody stood around long enough to have a conversation with.
There's a long line. There was a long line that we were standing
Long
in.
line the guy must have been totally bored.
Yeah, his phone died, so he had to talk to somebody.
By the way, that's my latest big insult is I'm not bored enough to talk to you right now.
So we covered panels on the roof, which way we want them to face if possible, the differences in, we should be about a 30-degree angle if we can, or 39-degree angle.
I like to call it myth clarity.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a good way to put it. There was a lot of clarity given in the first podcast.
Although I do have to say, we were pretty deep in the weeds for a Solar 101. So
That's okay.
maybe we should back it up.
This is a high-level university. This isn't middle school. So,
Great.
Well, what do we need to back up and cover before we go any further then, Dan?
Well, I think we were going to discuss a little bit just about the process to how to determine if solar is right for your home or your business.
Yes. Yeah. And so we kind of ended the last podcast with, most likely it's probably a good idea. But so the offices at Aero Building we're thinking about putting solar on the office, which is the plan from the beginning. The design of that building has a large south-facing roof. We knew that was part of
spot for solar. Yeah.
So let's talk about what the process is like to decide whether or not it's the right choice.
Sure. So a few weeks ago, we came out, we used a solar pathfinder now to do a shade analysis, right? Or a solar site analysis. There's a lot of different ways to do that. The solar pathfinder is a very simple tool that's been around for a long time. Now we're kind of trending towards mostly drone. So we take a bunch of pictures with the drone, load it into photogrammetry program, and then that builds a really nice 3D model. It'll model the shade as well. Unfortunately, here at your location, we have trees close enough that I can't get a good flight. So we went and reverted back to the old school way to get good shade analysis, but in a method that we could actually get.
And
get that
so
done.
this Pathfinder is a cylinder type device.
You say
kind of,
a lot.
Sorry. It's how I think.
It's a double A.
Is that like an apocryphal? What is it? An apocryphal story? Anecdotal story. That's what
you don't
guys
even
say.
know the joke.
Sorry,
You're like trying to
happens.
Criticize me and come down on me, and you don't even know what the joke is.
Okay, fine. This is day 2 of Steve and I being together. By the way, we were together all day yesterday in a truck, and all day today in the truck too. So the solar Pathfinder sits on the roof, but flat.
So you level it on the roof surface, and then here in the northern hemisphere, we're going to face it south. And then what that does is there's a replaceable disc that you put in there depending on the latitude that you're on, and you adjust for magnetic declination if it applies. Here it does not, because it's basically 0, which is very convenient. And then you put this reflective dome on the top of it, and that reflective dome is where you see the projected shade on the path of the sun throughout the year. And
so the piece that you can switch out depending on latitude has lines on it for this is the path of the sun at this point in the year.
Yeah, so it's the summer solstice and the winter solstice, and then each month in between. So really, it's about 6 points because the sun hits the same point twice a year, depending on which way it's going.
Yep. And so you can see the path of the sun and how it's going to hit the roof, and then you can see in that reflective dome where the trees are going to cover on that path.
Does the solar pathfinder electronically log this information?
No.
Or is it a visual recording?
It's strictly a visual tool. And in fact, the old timers and the old school way to do it is to take a grease pencil, reach in there. There's actually slots on the side where you can reach in there with a grease pencil and trace that. And then you come back and you count up each square and you take a percentage based on that. Fortunately, I don't have to do that. I load it into a piece of software that does all that for me.
And Dan took a picture of it with his cell phone.
So one picture, you load it in there, then you physically trace it in the program, and that'll spit out the monthly shade or the total resource or the solar resource for that month, and then we model it based on that. So we know throughout the year, each month, what percentage we're losing due to shading.
So the solar pathfinders, it's a mirror with some glass dome that has a bunch of grid lines on it.
More or less.
You get some information, take a picture, then take that information, put it into a program spits out the information you need.
Precisely.
And so in theory, if you had multiple sections of the building, or if you were talking about putting it in the yard, you could drag this thing around a dozen different places and figure out where the best place to sit was.
Yep.
So that was step 1. Step 2 we measured the roof.
Yep. We took physical measurements. Again, the preferred way to do it now is with a drone because it's highly accurate. And then if I miss a measurement, I don't have to come back. Don't have to get on the roof. Yeah, all these things are good things. And so we took physical measurements because there are some setbacks required by code. Here, it's 3 feet at the ridge and then 3 feet at a gable end.
And why is that setback?
That's for fire access. So that's part of.
Because they're going to cut a hole in the roof if it's on fire.
Is that
can't be a
something
solar
new? And is
panel.
that national? Or?
That comes from the IRC. It's different for commercial as well, but it comes from the IRC. A lot of jurisdictions have amended that and made changes. It burns a lot of roof space, and I'm told by several firefighters that nobody gets on the roof anymore to cut holes to manually vent it. So if you're not going to get up there, why do we need to leave that space? There are exemptions you can apply for, variances, and then in California, which is fairly solar mature, they've made some standard definitions and exemptions too, where if you're never going to put it on the north, which you're not, and that's a good access point, then you can use more of the roof space on the south.
Yeah, which here we have north and south facing.
Yeah, cut a hole just on the other side of the ridge if you want to get into the attic.
Yeah. And that's, are you even going to do that? And if the answer is no, should we really
the fire
be
department's like, that's not something that we mess with. Okay. And so then you also took some pictures of the roof while you're up there because that's the easiest way to go back and think about something.
You're right. Yeah.
I do that too. I always ask before I take pictures because I'm inside people's houses. You don't have that complaint or that challenge. I always tell people I took a couple pictures the first time I took my smartphone to a job to frame of reference. And then 2 hours later when I was working on the estimate, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of pictures that are kids running around in underpants or diapers, playing in the background that they were just part of the scene while I was there. And I didn't even think about it. And I was like, oh, I'm taking pictures inside people's houses. I need to figure this out and not do this.
Yeah. There's generally not a lot of toddlers on the roof. So that's not something we have to worry about too much. Yeah.
And so then next we climbed down and we looked at equipment on the side of the house. We looked at panel. Yep. We talked pathways.
So first we looked at your electrical panel. And so we want to see, is there physical space to add a solar breaker? And then also what's the bus rating of the electric panel and the main breaker size? Because those go into an NEC calculation for how much solar I can add to a given service. In your case, it's more than I can add to your electric panel. So we would do a tap in the meter base and then do a fuse disconnect that would then feed the inverter.
And so last time Steve was talking about this plan ahead idea for solar. And one of the things that you said is we try to get 2 runs of 2-inch conduit from roof down. And this has come up a couple times with houses that we know are going to get solar eventually. I have a little concern running, especially from basement to attic, a piece of conduit and whether or not we're going to get air that wants to circulate or condensation.
You can always cap it.
Correct.
Yeah, cap it or just, spray that fire block foam in there or something like that. Yeah.
And I'm just worried that becomes an issue at some point. So here, at my office, the thing that we decided to do was not worry about that at all. Go through the overhang and down the sidewall because it literally is just the side of the house that's covered with trees and everything. We think of it as being a private side, all that sort of stuff, and just run straight down the wall. And it's going to happen when we're ready to actually install the stuff. But we knew that was the case starting out. So while we didn't install the pipe, we planned for where it was going to route. We did the same thing at Hilltop House. We ran, because the meter base is on the detached garage, we ran conduit from the detached garage all the way to the house, and then we stubbed a couple inches out of the ground right by the foundation, rather than go another hole into the foundation below grade and through 2 floors. We're bringing it up the outside, and we'll poke through the overhang, or we'll wrap around the overhang because we don't have any roof penetrations on the Hilltop House. They're all sidewall things for plumbing and all that kind of stuff. So there is a different way to plan ahead there, but we have a unique case. Nobody sees that side of the house. There's no walkway. It's all planted strawberries.
Dan, does anybody make a pre-planning kit for solar that you know of? Can I go and buy Solar X's pre-planning kit that has a box or something that you can put on the roof that you just pop the top open and there's conduit connection to the basement or whatever?
I would say prepared solar ready kit, probably not. One thing we use a lot of is a Solodeck, which is a flashing similar to what you're talking about. It allows us to transition from PV wire, the wire from the solar panels, to building wire, whether that's MC or THHN and conduit. You could put that in advance, although you might not. It's unlikely you'll get it where you want it if you do it in advance, because we don't know where the rails are going to go. Or we're using a rail mounting system or a railless system. Is it in fact going to cover that spot? Because anyway, want to see that flashing under the array, not out to the side. And so,
and all those items, are those installer specific preferences too? Like your rail system with this specific panel may mount in a different way than this other panel mounts that has this other rail system that they like.
Usually the consideration for us is are we mounting in portrait or landscape? And the roof kind of dictates that. If you can fit them, sometimes you can fit more panels in landscape than you can in portrait. So if you turn them 90 degrees, and there are certain types of mounting systems that are more flexible and more able to work with landscape or portrait. So,
okay. And so like you'd have to know in advance what system you're putting in, how it's going to be oriented, which then it's like, well, we're doing it 3 months in advance. Sort of thing as we build the house or something. Okay, so then we have all that information gathered from site, and then you do what with that information?
So we take all that, we build a physical model, right? So we don't want to know how many panels will fit with the setbacks required by code. And then we're going to pull, in your case, you've been here long enough, we have enough energy use so that we can get a printout of your electric use, right? What we're really caring about is the kilowatt hours by month. And then we're going to put that into a model as well and figure out what a given system size will produce each month based on your tilt, so the tilt of your roof, your azimuth, the direction it faces, the site-specific shading, and then the energy use by month. And so we can
we have a monthly use for him here?
It's not broken out into a monthly. Well, I have the monthly numbers, but I don't think it makes for good podcasting just to read off monthly use numbers. What do you think, Steve?
No, nothing about Jake.
Let's pick two here, right? So you have electric heat. So
make up a number, because I want to do the calculation for clients. Like how do they take that number and like give me a monthly use number?
Yeah. So January here, he's got heat pumps. He used 2,098 kilowatt hours, and in July he used 1,869
2,098 kW
kilowatt hours. Yeah.
Right, yeah, kWh. Sorry. So if that, let's say that the monthly average, I don't know, I'm going to do an easy one, but let's say it's 1,000 kWh.
Here, this is probably easier for you. So total was 17,590 kilowatt hours.
For a year.
For a year.
17,000, you said?
17,590.
And you're going to divide that by 360?
Mm-hmm.
But so
365. Sorry, I know how many.
So is the 17,590? Is that as easy as translating that to? We need roughly an 18 kW system.
What you're going to take?
Zero?
We're going to take the 17,590 divided by 365, and that's going to give us 48.19.
Okay,
that's our daily usage. Right?
Yep, and then the average hours of insulation for here in Columbia is about 4.25. So it's higher in the summer, lower in the winter, but that's a good average number. Yep. And so you divide that by 4.25 and you get 11.33. So that's your system size in kW DC.
To go zero.
Yeah.
Or average zero.
Now that would assume, no shading and all that other good stuff too.
Okay. So I'm just going to recap this because you said, hey, take this number, take that number. But just so our users, for the ones that want to and they want to write this down.
Yeah.
You come up with the total use number.
Annual electric use, 12 months.
Annual electric use number, yes.
In kilowatt hours.
In kilowatt hours, kWh. And then you divide that number by 365, and that gives you daily use kWh.
Correct.
And then you take the daily use kWh, you divide it by a number, which is the amount of solar access for that day.
Yeah, so you take the average solar resource which is going to vary where you are.
And that's the Red Book number.
That's the Red Book
that
number
we talked about in the last podcast.
Yep.
So we take the Red Book number and we divide that, and then that comes up with the number of, which is the actual size in kilowatts DC
correct
power.
Yep.
For our system.
Yep, and that's a real basic rule of thumb if you're just trying to get ballpark size. Yeah.
Gotcha. Do you adjust that number by chance? Like, so if these were Jake's numbers and we come up with 11.33, does that mean you're basically targeting 11.4 for the size, or do you say, yeah, 11.3, I usually add 10%, so we're probably looking at a 14 kW system?
Yeah, to be perfectly frank, I never use this method. But
that was the best possible thing you could say.
All right.
But
so everything we said in the last 20 minutes.
Scratch it. No, it's a really good rule of thumb. But I'm going to take, and I'm building a comprehensive model based on the monthly use and the monthly shading and everything else.
Let me ask you this question in a different way. Based on your last 2 years of comprehensive modeling, is there a delta between the actual size of the system versus the computed size of the system? The old-fashioned way.
Well,
the rule of thumb way.
The rule of thumb way, because I don't actually back test it.
Right.
I don't have that answer for you.
Okay, but could you make an educated, let's make an educated guess.
Educated guess. I would say it probably trends higher because there's going to be some type of shading loss and maybe some other
There's
factors.
something in this calculation field that probably is off a little, so adding 10%. Because here's the thing, this is how I approach construction in general. I've hired you. We've got panels shipped here. I've got guys on my roof. They're putting in a strut system. They're attaching panels. We're running the cords. Buying 2 more panels really isn't a huge cost at that point, right? I mean, I tell people most of the cost is getting you to pull up to the house.
Yeah.
And with everything you need and getting on the roof. Once you're there, adding 2, 3, 4 panels is probably not. So I would have a tendency to take the rule of thumb number and probably add 10%.
Yeah, if you're sitting at home or work and you're running through these numbers and estimating, adding 10 to 15% for a good system size would be totally appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're also, I should note, we're specifically going to dance around the costs associated with this because Dan's cost and Dan's pricing doesn't have anything to do with even a competitor in our market or anyone in your market. Yeah. And the savings.
We get that crap all the time.
Yeah.
People.
How much does it cost to do that?
I put up a post about net zero. Those numbers don't make sense. Well, they do make sense when you're paying 24 cents a kilowatt hour.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. And Dan Roy, who's this house that we reference, he is a retired engineer. He has these calculations. He paid his system off in like 4.7 months or 4.7 years. Sorry. After rebates and all of that stuff, and then subtracting the zero energy costs and his car and all of that, 4.7 years, his $40,000 system was.
Yeah, the federal tax credit's a big one. Here we have an additional utility rebate, and a lot of markets have that as well. And then it also depends on, what all you're baking into that, right? So if you're environmentally minded, you might give weight to that. If the avoided cost of electricity that you're not buying, and then is that free or is it already a reduced rate, for a given amount of time? It's really dependent on how you view it. And so it's important to think about that too. We're not always just talking simple payback. There's a lot of factors.
Since you're the expert, how do you view it?
Well, I want to know.
Dan's got a mortgage.
If I save $200 a month on electricity, does that mean that $2,400 is a deduct on my solar system annually?
Sure. I mean, it's part of the cost. So solar is one of the few home improvements that you can make that actually pays for itself, right? And the time it takes
salesman.
The time it takes to pay for itself is completely dependent on the specific factors. But in generally, you can spend, $60,000 on a new kitchen and you'll recoup a percentage of that in resale potentially.
If you sell before it gets old.
Exactly. But this is something you see this as soon as that system's turned on, you get permission to operate, you're saving money every day until that system's
it's working in your favor.
Yeah.
And at some point it flips into totally in your favor. I tell people Dan Roy's house, Dan has the best retirement plan I know of any person because he lives in a passive house that has no energy bill, and he drives 2 cars on his solar panel system.
Yeah.
So as long as the sun comes up, Dan gets to live free and happy.
I don't know. My let's go to the casino every day and see if we can double down and retire earlier plan seems pretty exciting. Blackjack?
No.
You're a blackjack guy.
No, I'm not. I've never blackjack. Is that a card game?
Oh, if you know Steve well, that's a funny statement. So, okay, are you I don't know if you're completely done with our solar calculations. Do we want to talk about how far away this 11.33
I want to hear
kilowatts of solar is based off, from what your calculated needs are?
We're close. We should talk about your shading first.
Okay.
Because that is a factor that's kind of throwing a wrench in it for us.
I think I would like to have my wife listen to this part.
I
So
wish
we're going to say this is
I wish this was on YouTube, because he's got like a whole fancy folder here with bar graphs and charts.
We like to make it look pretty. We figure I don't feel right asking you to invest with us.
This is all about Joe Stiebrick's. If you don't do the show, you don't get the dough.
You're not wrong, right? But if I'm going to ask you to invest with us and be your solar contractor, I'm going to put in a lot of work to make sure that you have the information you need to make the decision that's right for you. If that means, yes, we want to do solar with you, great, let's do it. If that means, it's not for us right now, great. At least you have information that's valid for your specific situation, and you made the right choice for you.
Okay. So Dan wants to talk about trees.
Yeah.
Talk about trees. I love a good shading.
Now, I know your wife is not going to like this, but there are some trees that are causing you a problem.
Okay.
If you look at, I did 2 models for you. One as it is with the Solar Pathfinder and spitting that out. And we're losing a fair amount. The unweighted yearly average is about 61%, 61.7%. That means you're losing about 40% due to your tree cover. That's not great, because
That's a lot.
Whether we put up an array in full sun or fully shaded, right? It costs the same to put it in.
Yeah.
But that's going to produce 40% less of what it could at this point.
Okay.
So you start, and so we did that model. And, for example, even though these trees we're talking about are deciduous and they lose their leaves, those branches are still going to cast hard shade on the panels and reduce the performance. We're going to get some
And that's
production.
a much higher number than you would expect. Because I've done a couple where we've done this, that we're trying to get to 0 and such. And the solar guy is like, no, that tree across the street. And I'm like, that tree with like those branches? He goes, yeah, you wouldn't believe how much shading that tree
hard shade over
casts.
a solar cell or a solar panel, it really does knock it down. And that's one reason why you want module level like electronics. We'll talk about those later, like a DC optimizer or a microinverter that allows any intermittent shading that comes across the roof, if it's from a tree or from other parts of the structure, that
To only affect that panel.
only affects that panel. Yep. Each panel will perform to its maximum. Yeah.
So because our wives don't listen to the podcast.
Yeah,
we
this is
like
a safe space.
This is a safe space.
Yeah.
Would she even know? Like if
Oh,
she was
in a
gone for a
heartbeat.
week and
In a heartbeat.
not cut the tree down, but topped the tent, like from the eave
She'd
line
know.
up.
Yeah. She would know.
I'm pretty sure in this case, it's going to be readily apparent.
Yeah, these trees are. Yeah. Okay, so, but also these trees provide shade and they provide a little bit of cooling to the house as well. So there is a give take.
That's true. Although I will make the argument that if you look at the Solar Pathfinder report, as we'll show here in just a second, in those months when that shading from the sun is most valuable in the peak of the summer, you're not shaded there anyway, right? So it's shading you in the winter when maybe you do want that sun coming in.
Sure.
So. And then, so we modeled just dropping one tree. This was a tree to the southeast. Now here in Columbia, so off this corner of your office over here.
Sweet gum that I don't want anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good
And
argument.
again, I'm never going to come in and say, let's mow all these trees down, fill that roof with solar, right? That doesn't make sense. But there are times where if you're going to invest in solar, it makes sense to selectively remove trees that either are too close to the house or are impeding solar performance to get the best return on your investment.
Okay.
Not required. We're always going to model as is. And then if it gets better from that, great, it gets better.
Okay.
But just jumping ahead to the one where I took out that one sweet gum tree, we're jumping up. We jumped from 61.7 yearly average to 76.5 yearly average. So removal of one tree. Now we could also kind of game the system because late in the day sun here, based on the rebate structure, is more valuable for the rebate. So you can get a better rebate if it's less shaded in the afternoons, because that's when they're incentivizing it. So it might make more sense to take a tree off the other side.
Yeah. So
of
the tree
office.
that you omitted is southeast.
Right.
We have trees that are southwest that might make more sense.
And while this is a good tool, it's not granular enough to say, okay, we're going to take out this tree and get this perfect, because there's a little bit of overlap in this reflection in terms of which trees are which. So the best thing to do is, if you choose to move ahead with solar, is to take out the trees you're going to take out, build a new model, and then we can tell you with high accuracy what that's going to do for you.
Okay, so if we take no trees away, what are we looking at? What is our offset available for, and what is our KW recommended?
So based on...
This is the first time I've heard this too, by the way. So we let Dan present this live.
You never talked to him about solar before?
No, this is the first time that we've done it. Discuss it for
You need to get a drum roll button or something, So we came up with, this is what will fit on your roof, right?
Okay.
Is 12.21 kW. And again, that was around that same 300. Well, this is actually a 370 watt panel that's available right now. The 380s are in short supply for a number of reasons. But so this is a 370 watt panel, 33 of them. That's allowing you to keep your roof setbacks and access there and still fit.
But basically cover the entire roof besides the setbacks.
Pretty much covers that whole southern exposure, yep. And so that's 33 panels, and that'll give you a 61% offset of your based on your previous 12 months use. And the way that breaks down is in some months it does better. It's going to do best in the summer for you. You'll approach zero use or a slight credit. April, you'd have a credit. May, you'd have a credit. June, July would be about zero. And then August, the excess credit in April, May would pretty much take care of August. The the winter months, because you heat with heat pumps, so electric based heating. And when we have the least amount of solar resource, particularly because of those trees, that's when they're in you the worst. The delta there is much higher, right? So we have a much less of an impact to your winter bills than we do our summer bills, although we have enough here to offset some of that summer bills and carry credit forward on a monthly basis too.
But
interesting.
And also in the winter, I think plays into it is the coefficient of performance of the heating system is much higher as an air conditioner than it is as a heating device.
True.
So for 1 watt of energy, I get a lot more cooling out of that thing than I get heating out of it.
Yes. Yeah.
To probably in terms of like 3x, I think it's close to that.
Yeah. And even with that, it's way better than electric furnace. And if you look at the cost of you say natural gas connection or something like that, there's a monthly meter charge there, year round, regardless of whether or not you're using it. And, if you have environmental concerns about gas or, just a single fuel, I like to think of it as when you have just electric, even if you pay more to heat in the winter, you can be more efficient in the summer too. But then I've only got one fuel source, and it's one I can combat with solar.
Yep. So we are pressed for time. We have another hard out today. I'm going to say that we might have to have Dan back a third time too.
Yeah, we'll have to come back and...
if nothing else, we have to have after a
well,
system's installed.
I think after, when your system gets finalized, I think we come back and talk to Dan about what the final decisions were.
Or maybe we could have Dr. Bruton on the podcast to listen to Dan's spiel about how we should cut down trees. And I'm going to phrase it that way. Dan wants to talk to you about cutting down your trees.
Do I need to wear a helmet when I come in?
You should. You should also sit at the far end of the table from her too. You have more time to get out the door before she...
It's a question of what environmental fight are you fighting?
Exactly. So I think the moral of today's podcast is every situation is different, and the information and gathering process that your solar provider is going to go through is really going to dictate what your decisions you're going to make in the long run.
Right. Yeah. I think the important thing here is that if you're considering solar, take time to talk to a reputable solar contractor and make sure there's a detailed solar site analysis done so you can make the decision based on information specific to you, and then you'll know how everything's going to shake out and what considerations there are and how you could improve something if it's, suboptimal based on, shading or some other feature. Just don't be hesitant to reach out. They're happy to give you the information that's right for you.
How many kilowatts you install a year?
Gosh, I don't even know. A lot.
Good answer. A lot. I like it.
I don't count anymore. Like after we hit our first 100 systems, people ask me, I was like, I quit counting.
I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening to the podcast today. Because I was the one hosting, I'm going to let Steve take us out.
Well, I was just going to say, surprisingly, you did a pretty good job hosting, Jake, for a change.
Thanks, buddy.
I was actually I stayed awake, so that's a plus.
We'll give Dan credit on that one.
Well, we'll give Dan a little bit of credit on it. No, Dan, thanks a lot for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hey, everybody out there, you're listening to us today, but we are on YouTube, so get out there, smash that subscribe button. Jake wants you to tickle the subscribe button.
Which sounds way filthier than what it is.
What do you expect from a guy that bashes the military?
Oh, man.
Of course he's going to use tickle. But anyways, smash that subscribe button on YouTube. Go check out that series I have on there before the build, where we talk about the Hilltop Arrow Project, all the things that Jake and I talked about before we built it. We got Peter on there. He's doing wing nut testing, all kinds of videos on there. Our regularly scheduled podcast every 2 weeks is videoed and taped and recorded, so you can go there and watch the antics behind the scenes. And hey, thanks for joining us. Make sure you tell a friend, and until next time,
have a good day.